Welcome to the Tennessee EMS Education Association's Leadership Podcast, where self-leadership takes center stage. Hosted by Eric Kloss, tenured paramedic, master's prepared nurse with a focus on leadership, national speaker, and two-time author. This podcast is your go-to resource for transforming yourself into the leader your team deserves. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments as we dive into inspiring stories and expert insights every episode.
Well, Autumn, thanks for joining us today. We're really excited.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So I have some notes here, and I'm going to talk. This is such a big deal to be able to be doing this time of year. So across America, hospitals are focused on National Patient Safety Awareness Week. That is in March. And this topic is so timely, and I can't wait for people to hear about it. Yeah, so one of the things that is a standout that I want everybody to understand is that what we're going to talk about is not something that people talk about a lot until they're forced to.
Right.
So we're hoping that this really opens people's eyes up on this is something that we need to pay attention to. You and I have been in this field a long time. There's a couple of things I wanted to read, just sort of to get everybody engaged and to really, their mind's going to be like, oh, okay, I need to pay attention to this episode. So Lee was sharing with me this morning when we were talking about this is that 10% of medications given in the EMS profession in the field are believed to be associated with some type of error. That is scary. And there's
a lot.
It is a lot.
That's a lot.
There are many reasons. You and I could talk about these for an hour. It could be the hours, the stress and the fatigue, the improper training, or the training that we have, but here we're doing something on the interstate and it's 20 degrees and it's dark, right? The stress of families, dealing with a kid, and you got all that emotional things that we do a good job of training, but we can't recreate the stress of that.
Right, and you can't plan for the variables.
You can't.
Right, so.
And then the last thing, before we jump into this, is that in the U.S., it is believed that these numbers that I gave everyone, the 10%, it is believed that that is way underreported. What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, me too.
I think it's absolutely true.
And I've been a paramedic since 1990, so this is 35 years. As I read the 10%, it kind of made me pause to think about how many medications I have given. And if 10% of those were wrong, how many people that I impact that I didn't know to report?
Right.
So that's what we're talking about today. So I'm fired up about you being here. You got an incredible story. Before we jump into that, just kind of give everybody a snapshot of your career and what it is that you do.
Yeah, so I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama. My first exposure to EMS was an Explorer post. The local ambulance service had an Explorer group. I joined it in high school, and then they were actually doing year 3 of a pilot program where they were offering EMT Basic to high school students as seniors. So I was able to take that. I got my EMT Basic the week before I graduated high school.
What year was that?
That was in 2013.
Okay.
Started working for the ambulance service pretty much immediately, same ambulance service. Went straight through to advanced and then paramedic. Graduated paramedic school in 2015 and started working.
That is an amazing story. And not that we're going to talk about this, but it's such recruiting is a big deal, right? But for you being able to get exposed to this in high school, I think, there's certainly some activities with that, but that seems
It was an absolute blessing.
Yeah.
I had no idea at the time that this is what I wanted to do. I had no intentions of making a career out of it.
Okay.
And the stars aligned. The stars aligned for sure. I graduated in May of paramedic school. I turned 21 in September. So there was a gap of time where I was one of the younger ones to do it. So it's a cool story. It's fun to tell. I worked at the same service for several years before moving and becoming a mom. And so now I do a little bit of both.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And what do you currently do now? I know you're not full-time
Right.
because of children, and
Yes.
you're at that season of your life.
I work part-time
Okay.
as a critical care paramedic here in Tennessee.
Okay.
Work a lot of special events, which is a lot of fun. Get to transport patients every now and then. So I really get the best of both worlds. I get to help people and still do the fun stuff, right?
The event medicine gigs are so cool.
It's so cool. I remember when we moved up here, I was looking for jobs up here, and I said to my husband, I said, event medicine? That's just like special events all the time. That would be great. And he was like, no, that would be terrible. And I was like, no, it would be awesome. And here I am, and it is awesome. I get to have so much fun every time I go to work.
Years ago, we did event medicine before it was event medicine. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, I took my wife on one of the concerts that we worked. And it was the Pearl Jam concert. So this is when they were first
I've
popular.
heard stories of this concert.
So what happened was there was someone in the audience. It was kind of like the pit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is dancing. I mean, this was like in the 90s. So nobody has ever seen anything like this before. And this was before security was high. And someone had a can of mace. And they sprayed the crowd. And there were probably 30 people. Then we didn't know what the exposure was.
Right.
So we were getting everybody backstage into a room, and it was so chaotic that the band, Pearl Jam, came back and was helping us take care of patients.
That's incredible.
It was one
That's
of
a
the
story.
coolest
You need to
things
write that
ever.
down somewhere.
The lead singer did not, but all the other band came.
Right.
And my wife had never been to an event, and it was funny. We were just, joking about, those experiences. But anyway, I just thought it was important.
Yeah,
The
event medicine is a fun, it's a fun gig.
It's very
for
cool.
sure.
It's very cool. So let's talk about, you have a story that
I do.
happened to you probably, this was pre-COVID, so maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago.
It's been a minute.
Somewhere in there.
Yep.
Yeah. So tell us about that, Autumn.
So I was a paramedic. I was working on an ambulance. We ran a call. It was for a patient with back pain. We had no other info. Probably 30, 45 minutes away from the hospital, rural EMS. I had a paramedic partner. I was very lucky. My first few years in EMS, I had a paramedic. Very seasoned, very smart, taught me a lot, paramedic. We get there. This lady says, I fell off a ladder. I have back pain. And I just want to let you know that when I have back pain, or when I have pain in general, I have seizures. Okay. So, I went through the whole spinal clearing and everything, put her in a C-collar. We didn't end up backboarding her. But my thought process on it was, well, let's treat the pain and we'll prevent the seizure. So treated pain per protocol, gave her a dose of fentanyl, followed by another dose 5 minutes later, and we get on the road, we get going. I'm in the back by myself when all of a sudden this lady starts to have a huge grand mal seizure. Very violent, very nothing I had ever seen before.
First seizure as a medic, I'm assuming.
This was not my first seizure
Okay.
as a medic. This was my first violent,
Okay.
big, long-lasting
Yep.
seizure. So I tell my partner, I said, hey, help. So he pulls over. He jumps in the back. We already had an IV established, thankfully. And I said, okay, I'm going to give her midazolam. At the time, our drug box was a little tackle box. We had morphine, midazolam, XYZ. They were both in carpujets right next to each other. The morphine was 4 milligram vials. The midazolam was 5. So we give 2.5 and 2.5. So pulled it out, looked at it, saw the M, put it in the little device. I don't remember what they're called. Pushed what I thought was the whole 5. My partner looks at me. Seizure's not stopping. How much did you push? Looked down again, realized I had just slammed 4 of morphine. Had no idea until my partner told me, hey, look at that again. And immediately my heart stopped. I knew I had done something wrong. I knew I had messed up. I knew that this was not going to help this patient.
Patient still seizing?
Well, yes, it's not as violent now.
Okay.
But is still having some seizure activity.
Okay.
My partner immediately recognizes that I'm in fight or flight and says, okay, stop, oxygen. So we kind of start back from the basics, ABCs.
Okay.
We do end up giving her 2.5 of midazolam. Long story short, immediately call my supervisor on the radio.
Can I pause you
Yeah.
for a second? So I want to go back to the event. I don't want to interrupt you, but
No, you're fine.
I don't want to miss this. So I want to talk to you about, so at what point, tell us a little bit more about the point when you realized, like, I have just made a medication error. Like, spend a little bit of time on that, because I think I don't want to fly over that.
Right, yeah,
because,
that's the important part.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're sitting there, we're both on the buddy bench.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this patient, and I'm like, why is this not stopping? Like, what am I going to do when he says, hey, how much did you give? And I looked down, knowing I had given the 5 of it, and that's when I see morphine instead of midazolam.
So at that point, you realize that, okay.
I said, yes.
At that point, and correct me if I'm wrong, Autumn, so you immediately get the surge of stress that you're not prepared for, and you're in survival mode at this point.
Yes.
Like, what is specifically, do you remember what was going through your mind? Like,
just, oh crap.
okay.
Oh crap, what am I going to do? What do I do now?
Okay.
Now what? Who do I tell? Who do I not tell? Do I keep it to myself?
Did you think the patient was going to have an adverse outcome, or potentially even?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I don't mention that when I tell the story, because in my brain that's what was going to happen. It wasn't a possibility. It was what was going to happen. So I forget that a lot. When I realized that I had made this mistake, something bad was going to happen to the patient because of what I did.
Yeah.
There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's just how I felt at the time.
So after the error, you give, or your partner gives, some other medicine. The patient stops seizing. Did the patient go apneic and stop breathing? So you're watching your I'm assuming you're watching your partner.
I'm taking an active role.
Okay.
He did me a solid on that, and he coached me. Okay. He coached me through it. He said, "No, you're gonna learn. It's okay."
Okay.
So he was helping, but he was coaching. So we ended up using BVM, gave her some ventilations. We ended up pushing just a little bit of Narcan to kind of help that respiratory drive. We had the county fire department come for an extra rider on the way to the hospital, and I kind of just had a minute to just take a breath, calm down. It's still paramedicine. It's still emergency medicine. You know how to do this. It's going to be okay.
Were you scared?
Oh, I was terrified.
Okay.
I was. It took everything I had to hold back my tears.
Okay.
Right there.
So I want to ask you this question. Did you get taught this in paramedic school? Did you get taught this is what you do if you make an error?
No.
Okay. So I want to park here for a second, because neither was I. Mm-hmm. And for those that are listening to this and they're in a preceptor role, they're in a field training officer role, they teach, is that I think one of the things that we need to pay attention to is to talk about what happens in the event that you do make a mistake and an error. I don't think we as an industry do such a good job of that yet. Part of it may be from the lack of experience by the individuals teaching that have never made a big error. There was an error that I was an EMT, and I was with a paramedic, and I wasn't planning on telling the story, but I think it's very, very relevant. So this was my first experience. So I have been a huge advocate of be very careful about doing a refusal. Refusals of care. I think there is a place to do those, but there's another side of that. So years ago, this was back, this probably was in the late 80s. This is how long ago this was, so before I was a paramedic. So we get a call, we go to a person's house, and he's very sick, and he's an older gentleman, and he is adamant that he is not going to the hospital. And I'm fast forwarding, and there was a refusal done. And the next morning, this was late in the evening, the next morning there was another 911 call, and he was dead. And so that was my first experience of our actions are critical on, nobody ever taught me that, but now I have had an opportunity to teach that many, many times about these are the risks, these are the the danger. So thank you for sharing that. You've never been trained that before, but now you train it. Now you teach it that.
Yes, every student that I get, everybody I precept, orient, we talk about it.
Yep.
They hear this story.
Yeah, they hear the story.
They do.
So let's talk about you walk into the ED, and do you tell the team that there was a medication error? How did it unfold where there was an awareness on transition of care from EMS to the hospital?
It kind of goes back a little bit before we get to the hospital. My partner has said, you need to call supervisor right now and have him meet us at the ramp. So
The patient's still in the ambulance?
Yes, we're still on the side of the road. Gotcha. We haven't even started back. Okay. So I do that. I call him. I say, hey, there's been a med error. I just need you to meet me at the ramp. He knows nothing else. So I call report on the radio. I tell them everything in report. I tell them what was happening, the error, that I gave the correct medication after that we were using a BVM, everything. Completely transparent on my radio report. And we get to the hospital. We take the patient in, same thing. And the doctor that I delivered to happened to be my medical director. So that was very intimidating. I just knew that I was about to get hung out to dry. I didn't. She said, okay. And we carried on. And I was kind of like, that's it? That's what are you talking about, And
so the emotion of that.
It was I thought it was going to be a big ordeal. And it was like, okay, thanks for report. We'll talk about this later.
This is really interesting because of there's different degrees of errors, right? Mm-hmm. So it can be a small error. I remember missing a ballistic injury on a patient. I got that shot multiple times, and actually having that discovered in the trauma bay, where it was like, oh, I missed that. So like you're aware of a mistake that you make in real time, although it didn't impact the patient's outcome. You still kind of was like, ooh, that was one of those sinking feelings where you're like, I messed up. But having an experience like this where here you are 15, 20 minutes into not knowing what is going to happen to you. So your medical director maybe sort of eases you or is professional and be like, Autumn, we're going to take care of this later. We got to take care of the patient. So kind of walk us through your supervisor gets there. How'd that conversation go?
So I was really blessed to have great supervisors that had watched me grow up. I knew all of them very well. They all trained with us, beside us, with us. So I was very comfortable going to him and saying, this is what happened. So his first initial reaction was like, okay, let's take you out of service. Let's go back to the station. We're going to chat. So we did that. We go back. We sit what we called it the war room. It was a big conference room. And we all just sit around the table, me, my partner, my supervisor, some of the higher end supervisors, and the COO. And we talk about it. And I tell them what happened. And they're all like, okay, and they can see that I'm visibly upset about this. And they say, well, why did this happen? I said, well, I just picked up the wrong medicine. They said, no, really, why did this happen? What could have changed this? And they asked for my feedback. And I told them, well, the morphine and midazolam are right there, and I didn't look at it. And I said, okay, and we kind of just talked about some different things, and they said, okay, we'll go back to work.
I'm gonna ask you this question. I'm really like going through the steps of you telling the story. And as a leader, I question, because we learn things from our mistakes, obviously. Could you even appreciate that question? Or were you still like, I have just screwed up and you're going to ask me why it happened? Like, it's almost like, I would almost feel like a defensive as in, what do you mean how it happened? Like, I'm in the middle of chaos. This is not the time to ask me that question.
Right.
So you Monday morning quarterbacking this, could you appropriately answer that? Do you think you were in the right headspace?
I don't think I was in the right headspace. I don't think at the time I appreciated that. I thought I knew what they were asking, but I think looking back, I had no idea. I was still in just survival mode. Okay. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to lose my job. This patient's going to die. All the things.
Okay. So I know we're going to talk more about this. Based on you living this experience, patient is first, right? We
Yes.
got to take care of the patient.
Yes.
That was taken care of.
Yes.
Now we're in a position as leaders to support the employee. If you could think back on this autumn, what do you think the best way for us as leaders, for you as a leader now knowing what you know, is the best way to support the employee? And let me lead you with this. Just so, are you thinking that a mistake is made and you're saying, listen, we're going to support you, the patient's being taken care of, you're not going to run any more calls this shift, but we want you to hang out here. Just walk me through, what do you think the ideal situation would be after we make an error that we are just tore up about?
Right. I think the first step is just a timeout. Everybody just step back, take a break, take a breath, and let's talk it out.
Okay.
Kind of like what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Let's talk the whole thing through.
Letting you talk, not me necessarily talking.
Right.
Yeah. As a leader.
Tell me what happened.
Okay.
In your own words. And from there, I think there's varying degrees of errors. My service let me go back to work that day.
What time of the day did the error happen? Do you remember? Was it late in the shift?
No, it was pretty early.
Daytime.
It was daytime.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many calls do you think you have made as a paramedic at that point? How far in your paramedic career were you?
I'd been a paramedic for about 2.5 years.
2.5 years. Okay.
So enough to feel like I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
Enough to be careless at times, but obviously not enough to realize that I'm not invincible.
So when you say careless, I'm going to reframe that because I know exactly what you mean. It is maybe false confidence.
Yes, that's a better way of saying it.
So false confidence, and if you're in paramedicine, I think you were not surprised often. You know the routine, you know what to do with a seizure patient. So I think it is that being uncomfortable and not necessarily respecting the monster that is associated with very fast an incident happening.
Right. And I think every good paramedic has that moment.
Without question.
Yeah.
Without question. If you
There's
do
something
this
that's going to humble you.
Yeah.
Quickly.
And it may be the first day. And just to be honest, you have, I know that I have, Lee has, we've known EMS providers at all levels that they are humbled and they're out. Sometimes the incidents are so big that people don't recover from them in some form or fashion.
First responders are the backbone of our communities, but often funding restrictions leave stations without essential resources. That's where Serve Strong, Corbin Scott Goad Memorial Foundation steps in. They understand that not every response is a rescue, which is why they focus on ensuring first responders are well rested, physically fit, mentally strong, and equipped with the resources and education they need to save lives. Serve Strong is dedicated to filling in the gaps for first responders, addressing needs that stations might not be able to cover. The foundation exists because of the compassion and professionalism of first responders, witnessed firsthand in the midst of tragic circumstances. If your department needs support, or if you want to support their mission, visit servestrong.us. That's servestrong.us. Serve Strong, Corbin Scott Goad Memorial Foundation. Because when we're strong, our communities are strong too. Upcoming events. Mark your calendars for Serve Strong Upper Cumberland Pickleball Tournament on Saturday, May the 3rd. You can learn more by visiting servestrong.us/pickleball. And don't miss out on the first ever Serve Strong Bash, happening Saturday, October the 4th in Fairfield Glade. Save that date. Serve Strong, Corbin Scott Goad Memorial Foundation, filling in the gaps for first responders.
So let's go back. So walk us through, they say, okay, let's talk about the why. Do you go back to work?
The same day. Yep. They let me back on the truck that day.
How was that?
Terrifying.
With the same partner?
With the same partner.
Okay.
Which, like I said, again, he was also a paramedic, so we had the ability to switch off calls.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, I think we did switch off less that day. I think he ended up taking more after the fact. I don't remember for sure. But yeah, it was terrifying. It was terrifying. I was very careful. I'm not sure I pushed another med all day. And was just tiptoeing around everything. Could not really be the best paramedic because I was so worried about messing up again.
No question.
And that probably lasted a couple of weeks.
Okay. So you get off work. Did you have people, like, were they very transparent with the group? You know, like where you were starting to hear rumors, Autumn messed up. So they kind of kept it confidential.
Yeah, I never heard anything. The next thing I heard about it was probably 2 or 3 days later, my medical director came in, and again, we sat around the table, we talked about it, because she was at the hospital when it happened.
So no one in your leadership role reached out to you in your office?
Not that I remember.
Okay.
Not that I remember.
Do you think that would have been helpful?
You know, I don't know.
I can tell you it would have.
You think so?
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's interesting how you answer that, but I'm gonna shift gears from someone in a leadership role. Is that the one thing that we have to do, and we're all leaders, by the way, and I think that you being a frontline provider and me being in a leadership role, not always in a leadership role, Lee as well, is that is when your team needs to know that you care about them first. So in hindsight, this is all in hindsight, but this is a lessons learned podcast. So for those that are listening, sometimes we avoid difficult conversations.
It's very easy to do.
It is very easy. We do it in our personal lives. Like it's just a natural thing. But sometimes we have to pick the call up. Ideally, if we were case studying this out, the leader should have contacted you maybe on your off day, maybe the next day, minimum the next shift, and call and say, Autumn, are you okay today? How are you doing? Or maybe it's face to face. Let you talk to decompress this event and to allow them to know that you're thinking about it. So these are the little things that would be important. So that didn't happen. So you didn't realize that you needed that. So tell us again how long it was before you heard from your medical director?
I want to say it was the next shift.
Okay.
So 2 or 3 days.
Okay, 2 or 3 days. Walk us through that.
Yeah, she was great.
Okay.
Honestly, she came in, we sat down, we talked it through. She said, I could see how this happened. I can see. I understand it. I see that you realize you made a mistake. We went on about our lives.
Okay.
I did not know what was working in the background.
Yeah.
What ended up coming from it was something they called MAC.
Tell us about that.
Medication Administration Cross-Check.
Okay.
MACC. And it's a template, and you would read, it was a script for checking medication, for checking dose. And it became required for us to do MAC checks with our partner every time we gave a med.
And this was your event led to
I think it was in the works.
Okay.
I think my event was probably what tips the bucket
Okay.
of, okay, let's get this out.
Did the service implement that?
Yes, and they were very strict on this.
And how long after your event did this come to play?
Maybe a month.
Okay. And were you part of that? Did they say, hey, Autumn, listen, do you want to be part?
No,
Okay.
I had no idea. I honestly, it took me a minute to realize, my event happened, and then we came out with MAC.
Interesting.
Just wasn't thinking about it. I had, in a sense, moved on.
Okay.
Didn't really want to think about it. Kept it in the back of my mind while I was taking care of patients. Definitely made me more careful, more alert as a paramedic, but not something that I wanted to associate with every day either.
Were you transparent with the people that were around you that you made a mistake? Or did you?
I just didn't bring it up. I didn't lie about it. If somebody asked me, yeah, I did. But it wasn't something that I was like, oh, let's talk about this. I want to tell you the story. I wasn't proud of it. But I didn't hide it either.
So the service seems like they upheld their end of the deal with being confidential, protecting you. Mm-hmm. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so you're a month into this, there's a new policy that comes out. You're trying to put the event past you. Now this new policy is out. Did it work?
There was some pushback
Tell us
initially. About that. Why do we need this? This takes too much time.
Okay.
This, people just were giving excuses.
Yep.
Personally, at that point in my career, I was still young. I just kept my mouth shut and did it. And my partner was very adamant about we're doing MAC checks. He was great.
Same partner?
Same partner.
Okay.
And we did them. And it was fine. But there was a lot of pushback on, I don't want to do this. I don't have time to do this. And anytime there was any kind of mistake, error, delay, did you do MAC? Did you MAC check? And so they were very serious about it. Our service had cameras in the back.
Interesting.
That recorded all the time. And they would look. If there was a mistake, they would look and see if you did MAC. It did audio and video recording. And if you didn't do MAC, you needed to explain why. And it better be a good reason.
Do you know if there were errors associated to patients?
I can't say for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? You think this decreased errors?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, it was a great system. It really was. And it really did not take away from patient care. Yeah. It really did not cause a delay. It's while I'm sitting here drawing up the medication, I'm talking to you and telling you, hey, I'm giving 4 milligrams of Zofran to this patient for this reason. You repeat it back to me. You look at the dose. You look at the vial. We push. Yeah.
So my thoughts drift a little bit, Autumn. So I'm going to tell a story that I know has happened to providers before. And this is not a story, but a situation. You're the only medic in the back. You got a partner, maybe a medic, maybe AEMT, EMT, and you have a critical patient. Maybe it's a code, maybe it's RSI, whatever it is, and a medication is given, and the medic completely freezes. They realize what happened. They come back to reality, and no one ever knows. And we document the intent of what we should have given, and we didn't. And I know that happens.
It happens.
It happens
all
the time. So we are set up in pre-hospital medicine. You love it. I love it. Lee loves it. This is why we're doing it late in our careers. But it is a fragile system where errors can happen and is very easy to cover up.
Very easy. I was going to say that next. It's so easy to just brush it under the rug.
And it is not the right thing to do. So why are we talking about this today? Why do you feel that you want to share your story? And by the way, we're grateful because I know this is helping a lot of people in our audience that is like, wow, okay, this is a great story. There was a great outcome. The patient did okay, I'm assuming. Right?
Yes, she did. She was actually awake when we got to the hospital.
Perfect. So that is the best case scenario.
Yes.
So why are you wanting to talk about this now? What is the significance for you personally? We know generally why we're wanting to talk about it, but
right. I think paramedics, especially newer paramedics within that first 3 to 5 years, have this false confidence, like you said, and it won't happen to me. I know what I'm doing, and it can, and it will. And if you're not careful, if you don't take the proper steps, it could be much worse than what happened to me. Like I teach my students and my preceptor, who I'd orient, you have to be careful. You have to know that this can happen. Every step of the way, you just have to be aware of it. You don't have to be scared of it, but it needs to be in your brain that something bad could happen. It could be my fault, and I could kill somebody. And on the flip side of that, I think it's important for services, EMS services, to create an environment where it's safe to own up to your mistakes. Obviously, there's some mistakes that are going to be bad.
Yeah,
big, bad, and there's just no getting around that, right? But what happened to me was a big mistake. It had not a negative outcome. The patient was okay, but I could learn from it, and everybody else could learn from it, and I felt safe enough to, hey, I did wrong. And just creating that environment is huge, and I don't think that that's appreciated enough in EMS.
It's not. To err is human, and that's obviously something that we've heard about, meaning that you're going to make mistakes. And there's two things I want to mention to this. The first thing is that for those individuals that are teaching, that are precepting like yourself, I've had an opportunity to do this, is that this needs to be a conversation with your students. And what I would recommend is not lecture to them, but to ask them the question sincerely, in the right posture is to say, okay, Sally, or oh, okay, Jim, tell me about a case where you actually give the wrong medicine. Tell me what you're going to do, and let them walk you through so you know the coaching
That's a good
point.
idea.
The second thing, this is when the reality of this came to me, is in 1989, I went to paramedic school in Huntsville. And I'm 19 at this point when I start paramedic school. So I'm young. Like, I haven't experienced life. Yeah, I've experienced some EMS calls. So part of the interview process was you go in with the medical director of the EMS program. I don't remember his name, but I remember him being a very mature individual, probably in his 60s, maybe is the best. And this is what he asked me. So we're talking casually, and he said, Eric, he said, I'm going to ask you a question. Tell me what you would do if you made an error that killed someone. I have never heard anybody say anything or speak that language at all. Like, I didn't even understand the gravity.
Talk about putting you on the spot.
Put me on the spot.
Right.
And I answered the question, and if those are wondering what I asked, I didn't know. I've never been experienced. I'm 19-year-old, and I just said, well, I'm being like direct, but I wasn't. I was a little bit more crafty. I'm probably going to learn from my lessons and not make the same mistake again, and that satisfied him. I've never forgot that. And so I would encourage us to be part of maybe orientation when you're precepting, whatever it is, but also, I don't know if they exist, but there's policies or guidelines about what happens when an error is made, just so, one, it protects the supervisors to say, okay, these are the steps that need to be made. And then it also gives us as providers an opportunity to know what to expect in the event that it's happening. So, wow, that is absolutely fascinating. I just thought of this. What about the documentation piece? What were you recommended to do? Was there incident reports? We read a lot of run sheets, and I do in my job. I know Lee does. You have had an opportunity to do so, I know. Documentation, I don't know how else to say it, is poor at best for some of these very critical patients. Everybody is teaching about it. It's very important to our careers. But how did you document that, or what were you advised?
So, yeah, I was not sure on this. And I had kind of set myself up from the beginning to be transparent. So after kind of going back and forth with my partner, do I put this, do I put that? He said, just write the story. Just write what happened. And that's how I write my narratives anyway. I write a story from start to finish. And that's what I did. And I put it all in there. Everybody knew, all the important people knew already. There was nothing to hide. So I didn't have the problem of, oh, how do I hide this in my narrative? How do I document this? How do I do that? It took the stress off of me to just put what happened.
Completely transparent.
Yes.
It is what it is.
It is. That's exactly what it was.
It is what it is. Like I share this, and I'm not laughing, but the significance of it is, if you don't document, doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It still happened. It still happened. But I think what happens when the two don't line up is now you're having to justify why you didn't document it.
Right.
So
it's covering one lie with another line. You have to go back, and it's just so much easier in life, in medicine, and being an adult to just be transparent and be honest and be yourself. Like, just own it.
You got to own it. There's a great leadership book we've talked about for years, Extreme Ownership. It's one of my favorite leadership books. I think for EMS providers, nursing, we have personalities that we can take control of a scene. so it's a special person to do this, but that book, and I recommend the Audible version because the authors read it, and just really talks about, you just got to own it. Like, it doesn't, you just got to own it.
It is what it is.
It sucks sometimes, but it is what it is. It is what it is. So as we get close to, I can't believe this time has flown by. This has been so fun to be able to do this with you. So what advice do you have for anyone moving forward that is hearing this, and this is their first experience? Whoa, this is a big deal, and I want to learn more. What advice do you have for them?
Talk about it. Talk about it with your partners. Hey, if we give a med error, or if we have a med error, what are we going to do? What's our plan? Just like you talk about what medicines you're going to give to a patient when you get there, what dose of medication you're going to give, the patient's weight. Talk about it. Hey, one day we give the wrong medicine. What's our plan? And have that plan, and have a good enough relationship with your partner, and honestly with yourself, to own it. The other side of that, I would love to emphasize the EMS agencies, is get in there with your people. So for me, our leaders trained alongside us. There were not only teaching, there were several classes where my CEO and COO sat next to me and were running mega codes with me. So I saw them make mistakes. I saw them fumble over meds. It made them more human.
That's right.
And it was easier for me to go to them and say, help, I messed up. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for agencies, is get to know your people, care about your people, and stand next to your people. Support them.
That's amazing. We talk about on this podcast, Autumn, that leading yourself is the most important thing you'll ever do. It's the hardest thing. But I think you exemplify frontline leadership on really what that means truly as a role model. And for all of the directors and the people in authoritative positions, is I hope they share this with their staff to understand that we need to talk about these difficult conversations, because just because we ignore them doesn't mean they're happening.
Right.
Medication errors are happening
Every day.
single day, not just in Tennessee, but across the country. Some are bad. Some are really bad. But we got to hit it head on to be able to prevent these from happening. And I think that's our job. That's what
Right.
you've done, and we're grateful to be able to bring to light to this, to be able to share what can happen, but more or less really being in a proactive state to serving our patients better. And so I want to thank you for you sharing this story. This is so impactful and so timely, and we're just grateful for everything.
Thanks for having me.
Too. Well, you have taught me a lot, and I'm truly grateful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And for those that are listening to this, we are super excited that you joined us here on the TIMSA Leadership Podcast. Don't forget about the National Patient Safety Awareness Week in March. It's a big deal. It takes all of us to serve our patients better, and we're grateful for joining us.